Starting off, I'm going to quickly speak about and break down the three market structures for today's topic: monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Each one shapes how firms behave, how much choice consumers have, and how prices are set. Starting with monopoly, this is the most extreme form of market power. A monopoly is when one single firm dominates the entire market with a unique product that has no close substitutes. Because of this, the firm has significant control over the price. Usually there are very high barriers to entry, things like government regulation or extremely high startup costs. Examples can include utilities like water or electricity in many countries. In a monopoly, consumers have little choice and the lack of competition can lead to higher prices and less innovation. Next is oligopoly. This sits in the middle. It's made up of a small number of big firms that control the market, like airlines and mobile networks. Products can either be identical, like crude oil, or different, like smartphones. One of the key characteristics of an oligopoly is interdependence. Firms watch each other closely, and one company's decisions can trigger immediate reactions from the other firms. Barriers to entry stay high, often due to economies of scale, strong branding, or control of distribution channels. Because of this, oligopolies can sometimes lead to price rigidity, collusion, or intense non-price competition. Finally, there's monopolistic competition, which actually describes many everyday markets. Here we have a lot of small to medium firms, each selling differentiated products. Things like cafes, clothing brands, or barbers. The key feature is product differentiation. Firms compete not just on price, but on quality, location, and customer experience. Barriers to entry are low, so new competitors can enter the market relatively easily. Firms have some control over price, but because substitutes are readily available, that power is limited. Comparing the three, the biggest differences lie in the number of firms, the degree of product differentiation, and the barriers to entry. Monopoly has one firm and unique products. Oligopoly has a few dominant firms, and monopolistic competition has many firms selling slightly different versions of similar goods. Barriers to entry move from very high in monopoly to moderately high in oligopoly and low in monopolistic competition.
Let's start by talking about markets where the firms have some market power, but it's relatively competitive, monopolistic competition. For this, I want you to think of coffee shops, restaurants, clothing brands. Each firm sells a slightly different product. There might be a slight product differentiation, maybe through branding or advertising. Because of that differentiation, firms can charge prices that are above the marginal cost. Now, while they are not making crazy money like monopolies would, but just enough to gain a little extra profit. There are essentially no barriers to entry, so these firms can't push prices too high for too long, or they would attract more competition. Now, in an oligopoly market structure, firms have to be a bit more strategic. This is where a few large firms dominate the market. A prime examples would be airlines, soft drinks, and fast food chains. Oligopolies are interdependent. This means that each firm knows its decisions will affect the actions of the others. They'd want to cooperate with each other and act like a single monopoly. This will allow them to charge high prices and keep output low. While explicit collusion is often illegal, large firms often have an understanding, but not always. Game theory shows that firms often choose self-interest over collusion, even when collusion would make them all more profit. This results in prices settling somewhere in the middle, not as high as a monopoly, but definitely higher than in a more competitive market like monopolistic competition. Finally, we have monopoly, where one firm essentially has full market power. There are no close substitutes, and usually there tends to be barriers to entry such as economies of scale, or in some cases, you need such a high initial investment. A monopolistic firm decides its output by setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, and charges the highest price consumers are willing to pay for that quantity. This leads to lower output, higher prices, and a deadweight loss. This means there are missed opportunities because people value the product more than it costs to make, but they still can't buy it because the prices are too high.
Market efficiency refers to how efficiently scarce resources are produced and distributed. It is an important indicator of how well a market functions. In a perfectly competitive market, efficiency is maximized because firms are price takers, information is complete, there are no barriers to entry, and resources move freely. However, in reality, most markets are imperfect, exhibiting information asymmetries, market powers, barriers to entry, and transaction costs. These frictions prevent efficiency from reaching its theoretical maximum. Among the three major types of imperfect market, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly, efficiency generally decreases as the market power increases. Monopolistic competition is typically the most efficient of the three, while monopoly is the least efficient. In each structure, assuming firms act only in their own self-interest, and aim to maximize profit. That way loss tends to occur because output is restricted by the social optimal level. In oligopolies, strategy interdependence can lead firms to outcomes such as a prisoner's dilemma, in which individuals' rational decisions create a Nash equilibrium that fails to maximize total welfare. However, lower efficiency does not always imply negative outcomes for society. For example, in software development, a perfectly competitive market may sacrifice maximum productivity or allocative efficiency in favor of higher product quality, innovation, and consumer satisfaction. Flexible development process and differentiated products can better meet consumer needs than perfectly efficient but rigid production would. Still, when market power becomes excessive, the drawbacks such as higher prices and reduced consumers become more pronounced, which is why pure monopoly markets are generally discouraged. To protect public welfare, government implements policies aimed at correcting inefficiencies in imperfect market. Examples include price ceilings on essential goods, such as housings, and price floors like minimum wages. Many countries also enforce competition laws, also known as anti-monopoly or antitrust laws, to prevent firms from dominating the market, promote fair competition, and reduce deadweight loss.
Non-price competition and advertising. Now, one of the key factors of both monopolistic competitions and oligopolies are non-price competitions, more specifically advertising, branding, and product differentiation. However, the way each are used in their market differs from each other, in which I will be discussing in this part. Where monopolistic competition is more prevalent, advertisements usually equate to around 10 or 20% of the firm's revenue, since it incentivizes the viewer the qualities of their product more so than their competitors, justifying the price of advertising. Similarly, the way firms use branding, it also ensures quality, but now in the context of consistency. Although this is not the case every single time, a brand of firm indicates a standard of quality that needs to be met every single time. Therefore, when making decisions, a customer might opt out to deciding to invest in a firm due to their trust of the brand. The reason both factors work the way they do in monopolistic competitions are usually caused by product differentiation, in which each firm gives a singular product a unique twist enough to make the customer decide upon. Now, in oligopolies, advertisements are a tactical move due to the interdependency between companies, which is usually caused by the product differentiation or the lack of within the firms. Due to such similarities, in addition to a low amount of players within the market, each action that is taken by a single firm will directly affect the others within the market, therefore creating instances where advertisements are used as a means to gain similar in the fashion of a prisoner's dilemma mentioned priorly. Two different firms on an interdependent relationship could either both evenly get their half of the market value by not advertising, but one firm could instead advertise, getting the majority of the profit instead, and vice versa. Now, in the way non-price competitions are utilized from the perspective of both the market and the consumer, we must understand it is necessary for them to exist in order to incentivize customer choice and put forward corresponding options. But it must also be understood, firms might use it to their own advantage, implementing subconscious messaging so that the products appeals to a wider audience, or charging up marginal costs due to increasing competition. Both sides have points that are justifiable in their own right. However, it is undeniable the presence advertising and branding of products have on today's markets.
Regulation and policy responses. So how can the government reduce the number of monopolies or oligopolies and encourage fair competition? So the most direct way to counteract monopolies is to initiate controls on prices. This can either be a price ceiling or a price floor. So governments can initiate a price ceiling, which essentially maximises the price at which a product can be sold. This is seen in rent controls across Dublin to stop the exploitation of customers. Price floor. So governments can initiate a price floor which minimises the price at which a product can be sold. This is typically less common when trying to destabilise a monopoly, however it has been seen. For example, gas prices in Canada. A minimum price for gas was introduced, which basically meant that bigger firms couldn't undercut smaller firms and create an unfair market. So antitrust laws. So this essentially revolves around preventing companies from doing anything that limits competition in a market. So this includes blocking anti-competition mergers, preventing companies from merging and acquiring an unreasonable amount of market power. So this was seen when Ryanair tried to take over Aer Lingus. This would have been an unreasonable amount of market share, so the EU blocked this merger. So stopping unfair prices or practices such as predatory pricing, which is basically selling below the cost to drive competitors out of business. It's stopping exclusive contracts, which is forcing customers to buy products along with the monopolised product, and soft collusion, which is where companies agree to set prices at a certain level to avoid competition. Governments can also break up monopolised companies, and they can also try and ensure fair access for all companies by encouraging innovation to bring in more entrepreneurs to hopefully take down these monopolies. Nationalisation, so this is also when governments can take over certain companies in order to maintain prices and make sure these prices remain reasonable. So this can be seen in public transport, food and electricity. And finally, doing nothing as a final choice. An effective method, as stepping away from the scene of a monopoly, is oftentimes better than trying to implement a strategy to take down this monopoly, as many of the methods used to counteract monopolies actually they themselves have negative.